Do you want a hard question first or an easy one?
If it's something like, why did you make this mistake on page 316 or whatever?
No, I don't think any of ours are
No, I
that.
can handle any question. You can hit me with whatever you want.
All right. We'll start with an easier one. What's your favorite underappreciated novel that not many of us will have heard of?
My favorite underappreciated novel. Obviously not written by me, right? I have a lot of underappreciated novels. Just kidding.
It may sound a little conceited, so maybe.
Let's see. I really love this book called In the Woods by Tana French.
Is that sort of a mystery? I think I've heard of
Yes.
that.
Yes.
I think I bought it here a few years ago.
It's kind of dumb to say it's underappreciated because it won the Edgar Award. But I feel like it's not. When I've asked people about it, they haven't read it yet. So I just read it recently and absolutely loved it.
All right. What was an early experience where you learned that language had power?
Language definitely has power. When I was a kid, this is no shock to anyone, but I was obsessed with reading. I loved to read. And I just remember, this really stands out in my mind is when I read Charlotte's Web. Have you guys read Charlotte's Web?
I have.
Okay, thank you. If you haven't, just lie and say that you have, because that's really uncool to not have read Charlotte's Web. Nah, but I just remember when a certain someone dies in that book. I'm like, this is insane. This is about animals, talking animals, and I'm all sad and teary-eyed. And just my whole life, I've been a very strong believer in the power of storytelling. It's not just make-believe. It's not just entertainment. It is extremely life-affecting and life-changing to look at these stories and look at the world through another lens and through someone else's eyes and feel things that you may not feel in your normal life. And it kind of prepares you for when someday you might feel that. And so I've had people very close to me die throughout my life, and I think of some of the stories I've read that maybe prepared me for those emotions.
So then what is the effect you want to have on your readers? What do you want to leave them with? Like an impression?
My ultimate goal with my books is really to help someone be entertained and escape the world for a little while. I try really hard not to think about messages or themes or takeaways or, life-changing things that I need to put in my books. But I know that if I do my job well and tell a good story, and if I create characters that they fall in love with and care about, then I know that I can have an impact on their life. Even if it's just they needed to get their mind off something for a couple of hours, all the way to, maybe affecting them in some way like I was describing earlier.
Do you know this one?
Could you pinpoint any specific times during your teenage years that pushed you more towards becoming a writer?
Well, I've always written stories. Even when the first one I actually still have a copy of, I was 8 years old. And it was pretty much the worst story that any human has ever written. But I still have a copy of it. I had a great teacher in high school who was my English teacher, and Mrs. Becker. And she is always bragging about that it was her that turned me into an author. She takes full credit for it. She does have some of the credit. Can't give her full credit, but no, we like to joke about it. She was really cool because she could tell that I wasn't maybe the perfect example of an English student, but she saw this spark in me that, okay, he doesn't want to write, papers about this or that. He's extremely creative. It's all he cares about is creativity. And so she would let me do things that were a little outside the norm, against the grain a little bit. For example, this was AP English. My senior AP English thesis, like our big assignment at the end of the year, I did a book of limericks. So everyone else is writing like, you know, the effect of hunger in Africa on children and, you know, shortages of water in the world, all these profound things. And she let me do a book of limericks. And I did tell a story with limericks. I think limericks are hilarious if you do them right. And so I don't know, it was like 100 or 120 limericks, which sounds ridiculous, but I got an A on it. So anyway, she helped me break out of the mold, I think, and realize that English and writing and storytelling can mean a lot of different things to different people. I'm giving very long answers to your question. Sorry.
It's okay. During the making of the movies, were you on the set all of the time?
I visited the set, but not there all the time. So for the first one, Maze Runner, I went twice and filmed a cameo. I don't know if you guys noticed my amazing cameo. And then I went back again when they scored the music for the movie, which was really fun to watch this huge orchestra. And they have the movie up on the screen and they're recording the music. And I really, really love the soundtracks to the movies. So just enough to feel like a part of it. But, you know, I have a family. I can't really just take 3 months off and say sayonara to my family. So just a week or two on each set.
While watching these movies, did you have any specific criticism that you wouldn't have put in?
Ooh, that's a tough question. You're going to get me in trouble. This isn't being recorded or anything, right? No, the director Wes Ball and the writer T.S. Nolan and some of the producers of Maze Runner, they know very well that, of course, in a perfect world, we would have these movies be a little closer to the books, especially the second movie. But, you know, movie making is a completely different skill set. And, you know, I had to put a lot of my trust in them to take the spirit of my book and turn it into the best movie they could. And I think the third one, which we just started filming, I feel like really comes back to the books a little bit. And I'm very happy with it.
Did you have any significant thoughts for your story that didn't make it into the final book?
Oh yeah, there's always stuff like that. You're wondering what happened or what I left out? Well, interestingly enough, with the first one, The Maze Runner, it ended up this thing where I actually added a bunch of stuff right before it was published, because I felt like it didn't have quite enough depth to it. For example, the scene where the character Ben is banished was not in the original version or even in like the third or fourth draft. And it just blows my mind because it is such an important scene in both the book and the movie. And I hate to think that it almost wasn't even in there. But yeah, there's little things that end up getting cut, especially the new one, the Fever Code. One of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. We cut this huge, I mean, it was like 40 pages, this entire scene that my editor just did not think was working. And I fought for it and I did not want to cut it. But in the end, I realized she was right. And it was just like, you know, you pour your heart and soul into this and just to throw it in the garbage kind of makes me sad. But it's a very important lesson for a writer to learn. They call it kill your darlings sometimes. You just have to let it go.
When you are having blocks during your writing, do you have specific people or outside forces that help you get ideas?
Yeah, I am a big consumer of pop culture. I love to read. I love movies. I love television. It's the golden age of television. I've got like 10 shows that I'm obsessed with. And every time I do something like that, it triggers ideas, helps loosen my creative juices, gets them flowing. So I do a lot of that. It sounds like a really hard job, but someone has to do it, right?
What shows are you obsessed with then?
Oh, right now, I mean, I love Game of Thrones. I love Better Call Saul, the sequel to Breaking Bad, or prequel actually. I love Homeland. I love The Walking Dead, although I'm kind of getting sick of Walking Dead. That's not being recorded either, right? What else do I love? I love Fargo. That show is fantastic. Downton Abbey, even though it's over now. I'm not ashamed to admit that I love Downton Abbey very much. I love the new show, The Crown. I'm obsessed with anything that has to do with England, basically. And there's others.
Did you do any research into the mannerisms of children before you started writing?
I wouldn't say, research per se, but I mean, I'm just an extremely observant person. I've always observed people. I love to people watch. I have 4 kids of my own. I was once a kid, believe it or not. So a lot of times I just trust my instincts on how people talk, on how people react to things, on how people interact with each other. But then usually people who read the early drafts for me, they can also give me advice. Now my kids can do it. Dad, this person would never say that in that situation. You're an idiot. So that helps.
When you go back and read your old stories, what is your most common reaction?
That's an interesting question. Because when I wrote The Fever Code, I did have to go back and actually reread all the Maze Runner books because I'd forgotten some of it. And, it's a mix of good and bad. Sometimes I'll be reading it and just, I'm wincing and I'm just like, oh my, how did that get into there? That's horrible. I just wish so bad I could rephrase something or make dialogue a little better. But then there are also times where I'll read it and be like, wow, that's pretty good. I can't believe I wrote that. But it is really fun after a period of time to go back and read your old stuff.
Well, going back on this about the story you wrote when you were 8, did you save the stories you wrote during school, and do you remember any specific stories you wrote?
Yeah, I've got a lot of them. There's one that I told this story in Mexico, and the very next day of the signing, this girl had illustrated it. It was so amazing. I have it framed in my office now, but it was really dumb. It was about a mammoth who got stuck in a tar pit, and then a saber-toothed tiger tried to eat it, and he got stuck in the tar pit, and then a caveman tried to kill them to eat it, and he got stuck in the tar pit. And the last line of the story was, and they all died. Just brilliant stuff. So yeah, they brought me this awesome piece of art with a mammoth and a saber-toothed tiger and the caveman trying to, it was awesome. Fans are the best.
I want to ask you a follow-up question about what you said about killing your darlings, editing parts out of your book. When you're taking constructive criticism as a writer and you're evolving and people are giving you advice and you're changing your style, how do you take that and become a better writer without losing pieces of yourself, losing your own specific style? Because everyone's opinion will influence that.
It is extremely important to recognize that is a major issue, because it's very important to have a writer's group or some peers that read your stuff and give you feedback, but it can also be extremely damaging to your confidence. If you lose your confidence, it's over. You have to find confidence in yourself. So I always counsel writing groups to be really careful with how they do this. You have to be honest. You have to be able to take criticism, but people have to be careful because sometimes they're actively looking for something wrong. They're like, oh, I have to find at least 5 things wrong, or they're going to think I just sloughed it and didn't really try. Well, you're messing with someone's very fragile self-esteem when you do that. So both the critiquer and the person being critiqued have to find this balance of being honest, but also finding lots of positive things to say and only giving a criticism if you truly mean it. You're not just trying to come up with a list of 5 things. And it's a fine balance, a fine line you have to walk on.
I have a question. Was there ever a point in your young life where someone really hurt your ego and you almost didn't think you wanted to be a writer anymore?
had plenty of practice for rejection in high school in many different ways. I mean, yeah, I think about, when I was young, I was kind of a nerd. I mean, I wasn't kind of a nerd. I was a gigantic nerd. I was like supernaturally nerdy. And so, you get picked on sometimes, or athletes or whatever who think they're so cool would be mean to you. I don't know if it was ever directly related to my writing, but I felt, a lot of just being rejected as a human. It sounds so incredibly sad. But when I really got serious about writing in college, yeah, I had a lot of hurt feelings because I wasn't used to it. I didn't have thick skin yet. So I'd write a couple of chapters and just think it's the best thing ever written. And I'd give it to friends and they'd be like, dude, this sucks. What is this? I'm like, gee, thanks. But it's a really fragile thing, your self-esteem and your confidence in your writing. And you have to just grow a little bit of thick skin and be able to disagree with criticism. You have to be able to accept it if it's good criticism, but it's just as important to not just assume that everything anyone tells you that's criticism is true, because that will destroy your writing for good. So it's a fine line, like I said.
At what age did you know you wanted to become a writer?
Well, it's kind of like wanting to be an astronaut or a rock star, professional quarterback, whatever. I'd always say that as a kid. I'm going to be an author. I'm going to write books someday. And people are like, that's nice. And I go do your math homework. But I didn't get truly serious about it until college. And I think part of that is because I was studying accounting of all things, which I despised. And I'm not sure why I did it. But it really made me think, man, maybe I could actually make a living as a writer. And that's when I really started telling people that was my ultimate goal. But I did have to work in accounting for a few years before I could make enough money writing. So.
Does anyone influence you to write?
Yeah, everything does. Everything, that's not an exaggeration. Every person I ever meet, every movie I ever watch, every conversation I ever have, every dream I ever have, even if it's just a tiny little thing, it influences my writing or inspires my writing.
And do you have a favorite place you like to go and write?
Yes. We just built a new house. And so, of course, I'm an author, and it's author house. And the only room that I really had control over, because my wife is the boss, was the library. I was like, I have to have a library. And so it's just the most cliche library you've ever heard of. It has a ladder, spiral staircase, fireplace, of course, lots of books. And that's my favorite place to write now.
Sounds like heaven.
It's pretty sweet.
It really does.
It's pretty sweet. I'm very proud of it and love it.
All right. My sister couldn't make it today, and she was going to interview you. So I'm just going to
Aw.
ask you some of her questions.
Okay.
She wants to know if Wicked is good.
That is the central question of the entire series. Now, I'm glad you asked that, because I love talking about this, that on its face, Wicked is good is just a ridiculous thing. First of all, it's ridiculous that they're called Wicked. Like, okay, let's go out and do good in the world. Let's call ourselves Wicked. But it was very purposeful. It's like, part of it's being ironic. Part of it is that it was part of like the variables and stuff. But anyway, mainly what the actual phrase "wicked is good" means so much more than it first appears, because it's two complete opposite things, right? Evil, good, good and evil, wicked, good. And is another way of having an equal sign, right? So wicked is good. You're saying that two things that are complete opposites are equal. And I didn't really do this on purpose that much, but a major theme of the series is that nothing is black or white. I wanted you to feel at times that what Wicked is doing, you can kind of understand what they're doing. I mean, it's like, okay, these are terrible things, but if we don't do it, the whole human race will go extinct. I mean, what do you want me to do? What good is it to stop if we're just all going to die? I mean, and so they get extremely desperate and do very desperate things, but they're also trying to save the human race. So you can see their side of the story, but you can also obviously see the side of Thomas and the Gladers' story too, because terrible things are being done to them. And so I love it that the series might make you think about things and realize that not everything is just perfectly laid out, black or white, right or wrong in life. So that was a very long way of saying there is no answer.
That frustrates me a little bit more. Okay, so do they like ever find a cure at all? If you were to ever write a book, would you ever write it when they find a cure?
Well, no.
They wouldn't?
Not in my vision of where things ended up and where they go after that. Ava Page, I mean, I know this is major spoilery stuff, but Ava Page made the decision at the last second that they had failed in their mission and that the only way to truly save the human race was to send all the immunes somewhere else. And so in my mind, they go somewhere else and the rest of the world ends up dying out because the disease just wipes them out. Eventually. It'd be a really horrendous few decades or whatever.
So what is like your procedure to writing a book? Like, do you just sit down with a pen and paper and just write your ideas down, like intro, the 3 body paragraphs and conclusions, and like, do you put all of your planning together? Or do you just type away like?
I'm a mixture of both. I do try to do a very simple outline, and that's just a matter of, it's really just brainstorming. I'm just writing anything that pops in my head about, oh, I want this to happen, I want that to happen. And I start thinking about the ending, and I mean, it's all about the ending, right? To me, you can read the greatest book in the world, but then if it has a terrible ending, it kind of ruins it. And then once you do have a good ending, everything in the book has to lead to that ending. So I do a little bit of outlining, but I would say 85% of my best ideas come to me as I'm literally typing as fast as I can. I don't know how it works, but it's like my body's doing 2 things at once. It's typing words that are in my head, but my head is also somewhere brainstorming on its own, like on automatic co-pilot or something.
And my last question is, how did you come up with these stories? What made you think of writing this kind of a story?
I think it was very inspired by a lot of stuff I've read and watched, like Lord of the Flies.
I've never read that before.
Is a very obvious influence. It's a bunch of boys stranded on an island, and they start doing really terrible things to each other, like killing each other, and it's a really happy story. You should read it. And The Maze is a bunch of boys stuck in a maze. So it's very inspired by Lord of the Flies. And the TV show Lost, which might be a little before your time. And a million other little things. I've loved mazes ever since I saw the movie The Shining.
I hate scary movies, so
Which-
I haven't watched it.
It ends with this beautiful, lovely scene of a man chasing his son with an axe through a garden maze, and it's snowing, and he's trying to kill his kid. It's really awesome. You should watch that one right after you read Lord of the Flies. And so mazes have always creeped me out, fascinated me, and it felt natural to write a book where the maze was actually like a character in the story.
Okay. Just thought of one. Who is your favorite character?
I always say Minho.
He's my favorite too.
He's my favorite.
Yeah.
He's kind of sassy, smart alecky, but fiercely loyal. So
Did you always know you were going to reveal the secrets and history of the maze after Maze Runner was published?
As in prequels?
Yeah.
Yes, I did actually. In fact, when I sold Maze Runner, and I said I really envision this as a trilogy, but the nature of the story is it lends itself to prequels. Why I was only planning on one prequel, but it's interesting because when the trilogy was done, Random House said, "Hey, remember that prequel idea? Let's do it." And the Fever Code is the one I had in mind, with actually the characters from the Maze Runner showing how they end up in the maze. But my editor convinced me to put that on hold and go farther back and show how the world got so messed up, which was a huge risk because it's all new characters in the kill order. It's, you have this successful series and suddenly you write a book that doesn't have any of the characters in it. So it was a big risk, but people seemed to like it. And then Fever Code was the one I had always planned to write from the beginning, and it was really fun to finally write it.
Did you always plan on Teresa to be Wicked's spy?
I mean, basically, because that was part of the plotting from the very beginning, is that I wanted Teresa to be the embodiment of what we were talking about, the whole wicked is good dichotomy. Did I just use that word right? I'm not very good with the English thing, even though I write books. Because she is, of all the characters, the most tormented. She really believes that wicked is good. They're trying to save the human race. It's kind of hard to argue against that. So yeah, she goes a little more extreme than everyone else. But again, can you really ever really truly fault Teresa? She's just trying to do what she thinks is right. She's not like this evil person running around laughing like the Joker, trying to get people killed.
Okay, which book out of the 5 is your favorite?
I think The Fever Code is my favorite.
Not to spoil anything if anyone hasn't read The Death Cure, but do you think Newt could have continued as a character, and do you think his death was like, it had to happen?
Well, you know what? I have been completely flabbergasted by the reaction to Newt. It is unreal. You guys would not believe it. Countless people have tattooed page 250 somewhere on their body, which is where, the thing happens. And that it's actually on like, what's that website that does, it's like Urban Dictionary or whatever. Things like we do not speak of page 250 and why people are always talking about page 250. And it's just unreal. And it means the world to me because I created a character whose death meant that much to people. And it is really funny to me how often I get a tweet or something that is something to the effect of, "You are Satan, I hate you, OMG, OMG, I love you, you're my favorite author." In the same tweet. And I always tell people, because they always say, "Why Newt?" Or they make me sign page 250 with a sad face or apologize. And I always tell them, you know what? If I can make you feel that kind of emotion, that is just amazing. I succeeded, and I'm sorry about it. But yeah, someone had to, I needed a control subject. And they're doing a really good job with the third movie of at least staying true to the spirit of the whole thing, of how devastated Thomas is when he realizes Newt is not immune, and the whole death thing. And they did this brilliant thing that I'm not going to spoil of how to end the movie with this really emotional punch that has to do with Newt. That's, oh my gosh, it's going to be the last half hour of the movie is going to be spectacular and extremely emotional, while also being very suspenseful, and it's just, I think people are going to love the third movie.
Well, that's always good. As much as Newt's death, like, it really hurt me. But what was your thought process for like how he got his limp, like that he tried to kill himself? Like, did you always know you were gonna make it in that way, or?
Yeah, well, he has that limp in the very first book, and an author does this a lot. They may not know the specific detail, but usually you wouldn't just, it's like, why would I just randomly make some guy have a limp? So when I did that, I'm like, okay, something dark happened in Newt's past. I maybe don't know quite what it is yet, but I was already thinking along those lines. And then by the time it came to reveal why he has the limp, I had already very solidly decided that he had done what he did. And you actually, in the Fever Code, it's actually a scene in the Fever Code. And I'm very happy also that is something else that's also, they're staying faithful to that in the movie. There's going to be a scene where, I shouldn't be talking about that. Let's just say it's faithful.
Okay, that's good. How long did it take you to come up with the whole idea? Like, did it come to you in like a few weeks, or did it take like years of thinking about how to put this world together?
Honestly, half of the main ideas of the Maze Runner came to me in 3 hours one night. I was going to bed and I suddenly pictured this giant stone maze. And I'm like, why am I picturing a giant stone maze in my head? I mean, I was kind of thinking about story ideas. And I just knew that I had to write a story about it. There's some reason there's this giant stone maze, which seems really weird. And then my mind started pumping so heavily that I got up out of bed and grabbed a notebook and brainstormed. The only time I use pen and paper is when I'm brainstorming. Everything else I use my laptop. There's something about physically writing whatever pops in your head. It doesn't feel the same typing anything that pops in my head. So I highly recommend trying that when you brainstorm. I mean, brainstorming is something you learn in kindergarten, but it is by far my most valuable tool, where I'm like, okay, everything that pops in my head for the next 30 minutes, I'm going to write it down. And you get some stupid stuff, but then you also get some great stuff. And then I started writing it like a week later. I was just really excited about it. And it only took me about 3 months to write the first draft. So that happened quickly. But then there was 3 years of rewrites, rejections, more rewrites, changing agent, getting a new agent. He sold it to Random House. I mean, it was not easy, but I stuck with it.
Do you think your excelling imagination is what makes you a good writer?
My what imagination?
Excelling imagination.
I definitely, that is my strength for sure, is my imagination. My writing skills need help, lots of help. And I have worked really hard over the last 13 years to improve my writing. But luckily for me, the core of storytelling and ideas, because I had that as a foundation, other people could help my writing come up to par to match the ideas behind it.
I guess it's my turn. So in Fever Code, there's like a time stamp on the beginning of every chapter,
Mm-hmm.
and it says like 229. Is that the year?
Yes.
Is that like 2,229?
So I'm going to be honest with you about this instead of lying to you. I guess that was the alternative. I can either lie or be honest. My original thinking with that was that, I mean, it's still my thinking, but I don't know how solidly I feel about it, was that sometime in the next like 20 or 30 years, there was going to be this major event in the world, something life-changing, maybe like Donald Trump being elected president or something. That's a joke. And that it would spur the world to start renaming their years. I didn't really know what the event was. It was just kind of this vague thing. I'm like, because it wasn't that important when I was writing Maze Runner. And so it seems ridiculous that the Maze Runner could be over 200 years in the future. But it also is kind of cool to think of that because there's some extremely advanced technologies in the Maze Runner, but there's also this archaic feel to Maze Runner because of the sun flares and what they did. And I had a lot of fun with the kill order. There's a good chunk of the kill order where we actually saw the world, what it was like before the sun flares. And I tried not to make it like cheesy future technology, but just enough difference to show that, you know what, in 200 years, we'll basically be the same type of people, but there will just be these technologies that we've grown to take for granted. You know, like particularly the flat trans, which I would give away at least 2 of my children if that were actually a technology that we could use. Because then I could have come to Tucson just by stepping through a door. That would have been awesome. But so I like that mix, I guess is what I'm saying. Some of my favorite sci-fi movies have been that thing where they mix really advanced technology with this archaic, dirty, gritty feel, like Blade Runner and Aliens, and even like a little bit Guardians of the Galaxy's kind of like that. But that is what it is. It's basically 200 and something years in the future, and they started at 0 again because of some main big world event. So people ask me all the time, and I usually don't answer. So you got lucky.
Ooh. Was Wicked like ever really working on a cure, or were they just kind of like filtering out people that should be allowed to go into the new world?
Well, see, that's a tough question because there's a pretty big divergence with that, with movie world and book world. So I'm going to answer book world. In book world, absolutely 100%, they were desperately trying to find a cure. That was their only goal. And then Ava Page, everyone else was they got so obsessed with it that they went to extreme lengths beyond maybe even what they should. And Ava Page was wise enough to suddenly realize, at the very least, we have these people who are immune to it. We got to make sure they don't get killed. And so she changed course pretty late in the process.
This is like a big spoiler in just the first book, but why Chuck?
I think we've gone beyond spoilers, so I think you're okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, you guys weren't at my presentation earlier, were you? You were there?
Oh, no,
Oh, you were just scratching your face? It's like an auction. I'll see you if you do something. So, I wanted to set up a very solid foundation for something in future books, in books 2 and books 3, that you could never feel safe with anyone thinking that they can't die. Because that really ratchets up the suspense. You know, you go see a movie and I was going to say Tom Cruise, but that is really aging me. I mean, he's still doing stuff, but like, who's your favorite action actor right now? Chris Pratt in Guardians of the Galaxy, Jurassic World, you know? He's a good one, right? Or Chris Evans as Captain America. When you go see a Captain America movie, do you really think that Captain America is going to die?
You better not.
And even if he does die, you know, in comic book world, somehow they figure out a way to bring him back. Or Chris Pratt in Jurassic World, which they just released a little teaser for the sequel, actually. You know he's not going to die. It's Chris Pratt. He's not going to die. So when he's in a scene being chased by a dinosaur, it's kind of, I mean, it's suspenseful, but he's not going to die. But if James Dashner kills this sweet little 12-year-old kid in this brutal fashion, and he's one of the main characters, it may make you think, oh, maybe James does like to kill people. And maybe I should feel scared in this scene because who knows if one of these guys is going to die or not. And that was the purpose of Chuck. Plus, just the sweetness of the sacrifice he made. And that's a major theme of the Maze Runner series is friendship and loyalty. And I think that's why people have attached to these characters so much, because friendship can be everything. And I mean, Chuck basically sacrificed his life to save someone else. It's like the ultimate thing you can do for someone.
And can you explain the Grievers and like why you named them?
Yes. The Grievers, I wanted something scary in the maze, and I didn't want it to be anything that had already been used. So I didn't want trolls or goblins or vampires or anything like that. So I came up with my own creation, and I love the thought of part animal, part machine. And I just made them kind of hideous and terrifying. Grievers, I don't know, that popped in my head one day. I'm like, grieving is usually associated with bad things. And so I called them Grievers.
Thanks so much, James, for your time today.
You are very welcome. Man.